Tensions are rising in Russia, and that's not me saying it. The Russian media is reporting on this. The reason behind this is simple. As General Ben Hodges just said, Ukraine is hammering Russia's Achilles heel, and the Russian citizens are feeling the pinch. That's not a good news for Vladimir Putin because now even his media is turning against him. This is what they just said. Russian Telegram channel Neziger posted this about the state of Russian refineries and fuel market. Tensions in Russia's fuel market are rising. There are kilometer-long queues at gas stations, and wholesale prices for gasoline and diesel have hit record highs. Officially, the reasons are no longer hidden. Refineries are shutting down after Ukrainian strikes. During peak summer days, up to 40% of the processing capacity was idle. In 2025, the tactics of Ukrainian strikes have changed. Previously, they were one time. A unit would be damaged, the plant would reduce output but recover within a few weeks. Now attacks are carried out in series and repeated on the same facility. Ryazan, Novo, Sirzan, Volgograd, Opix refineries. This prevents the restoration of primary processing and hydrocracking and catalytic cracking units. For example, after a series of attacks on Ryazan refinery, which is 5% of Russia's total capacity, the refinery has half of its processing halted, while Novo refinery, which is 3% of Russia's total capacity, has its primary processing damaged. The largest refinery in southern Russia, Volgograd's Lukoil, as well as Samara and Srizhan refineries have stopped receiving crude. Now, this post actually shares an interesting insight that we didn't know, but I'm guessing Ukrainian armed forces knew. Russia cannot actually repair these refineries, and the reason is here. The choice of refineries as targets is explained by their technological vulnerability. Modern Russian refineries were built using equipment from Shell, Exxon, UOP, and Haldor Topis, hydrocracking, catalytic reforming, isomerization, and Euro 5 component production. After 2022, deliveries of equipment, software, and catalysts ceased. Catalysts are consumable, replaced every 1 to 3 years. Without Western supplies, Russia relies on old stock or Chinese analogs with inferior performance. Hydroprocessing reactors and compressors are manufactured in only a few countries, with delivery times up to a year. Because of this, every Ukrainian strike on a hydrocracking or reforming unit leads to months of downtime. Now, as if this was not bad enough, just 2 days ago, President Trump turned on Russia because Putin has been playing United States for time. President Trump has openly said that it's time for Ukraine to start attacking inside Russia and start putting pressure on Vladimir Putin and Russian citizens. So I have a special guest today, Jake Broe, who I asked the most important question. Are we nearing the end of the war? Let's get into that conversation. What's up, everyone? Today we have none other than fellow YouTuber Jake Broe. Welcome to the channel, Jake.
Thanks for having me on, Sam. It's great to meet you finally.
Excited to have this conversation, and we'll just jump right into it. I don't know if you saw, President Trump just tweeted yesterday that maybe Ukraine should start going inside Russia more and putting pressure on Russia by attacking Russian military infrastructure inside the country. How do you react to that? Is that a good sign? Do you see that?
Well, it's been 8 months, and Donald Trump has made no progress having the Russians move on their demands. This is the clip from Russian Media Monitor. I showed it on my channel, but the Russians just make fun of Trump. They don't take him serious. Like, when you actually listen to how the Russians describe Trump the last 8 months, they think he's a fool. They think he is easy to manipulate. This summit in Alaska, this is how they reported it, that Putin dominated Trump in every single way. For the last 3.5 years, the Russians have not compromised on anything. All of their demands that they were demanding at the onset of the full-scale invasion, they're all still in place. Trump has made no progress. He's not gotten them to budge on anything. So you would expect someone to get frustrated after being ignored and belittled and humiliated like Trump has been the last 8 months by the Russians. So yes, I hope that we can get some shifts in policy and opinions from the White House, and they'll give some encouragement or perhaps some military aid to convince the Russians they need to start negotiating on their unreasonable demands of Ukraine's capitulation.
Now, so I guess since you brought it up, let's talk about the Alaska summit. a lot of news came out, then quickly it was like debunked by the Russians, where they said, we didn't agree to any security guarantees, we didn't agree to a meeting and stuff like that. How do you read this summit? A lot of people have argued that it was a win for Putin. US really didn't achieve anything for Ukraine. Do you see it that way?
The lasting image, when they talk about this summit 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, they're going to show that picture of uniformed, active duty military personnel on their hands and knees, literally rolling out the red carpet for the dictator of Russia. Trump is basically bouncing out of his shoes, clapping when Putin comes down that red carpet. The Fox News broadcast edited that out, but yeah, we saw how gleeful and happy and excited Trump was to meet his grand old friend, Vladimir Putin. We then had this absurd flyover, this B-2 bomber being escorted by F-35s. This B-2 bomber had to come from Missouri, the Whiteman Air Force Base. So I don't know what the fuel per hour cost of a B-2 bomber is, but this cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to have this flyover for Vladimir Putin, to honor him, to show him respect. I understand Trump wants to look cool, and he had F-22 Raptors parked on the runway, but no, this was shameful. Putin did not deserve to be welcomed on U.S. soil because nothing was accomplished. If we were signing a final peace agreement and peace settlement and the killing would stop, I'd say, okay, all right, fine. Red carpet treatments, Putin is willing to end the war, a flyover, Trump's happy to see them. Okay, fine, we're getting the killing to stop. But the Russians did nothing. Nothing was announced. They cut the event short. The press conference, which was supposed to be an hour, was 10 minutes, and Putin dominated Trump. He took the podium. He spoke first. Trump rambled for 2 minutes, and then it was all over. So it's just frustrating because when you have high-level negotiations, heads of state show up last to sign the final document. But Trump doesn't understand diplomacy. He doesn't understand government. He views this as a business deal in which you need to look your, adversary or business partner in the eyes and then get a feel for them. And that's what Trump said. I just need to be in the room with Putin for 2 minutes and then I'll know if a peace deal is possible. And he said it was. He said progress was made. We're going to get security guarantees for Ukraine. Russia agreed to this. And we're going to get a one-on-one between Putin and Zelensky. Putin agreed to this. 4 days later, Lavrov clarifies, when we were talking about security guarantees, we were talking about Russia offering security guarantees to Ukraine. In that, we'll amend our constitution to say we won't invade any more countries, and we'll have Russian and Chinese peacekeeping forces in Ukraine to stop the war. That is insane, delusional. Additionally, we're now learning that Putin never agreed to a face-to-face with Zelensky. They just agreed to increase the level of representation at the next Russia-Ukraine peace talk. So before they were sending this third-tier guy, Medinsky or whatever, and maybe Lavrov will be willing to go next time in Istanbul. But no, Putin is never going to agree to a face-to-face with Zelensky because he doesn't view Zelensky as the legitimate leader of Ukraine.
Which makes sense. And again, you've been following this war probably more than most people, right? Especially here in the United States, almost every single day. And you probably have noticed a trend where when President Trump and Putin first had a call, they agreed to some sort of pause on attacks on energy infrastructure, but US announced it was energy and infrastructure. Russia announced it was just energy infrastructure, right? And then we have had similar miscommunications where people say, Steve Witkoff, which again, not a fan of the guy either. I think we should have Marco Rubio do the negotiations. But Steve Witkoff goes into the meeting with Putin. He comes out. He says meeting went differently than how Russia is saying it. Not the same thing as you brought up with what happened in the summit. Russia saying we didn't agree to anything, but U.S. delegation on interview, by the way. This is the important part. This wasn't like some report where the media organizations are saying that, hey, this is what was agreed on. We had Marco Rubio, we had Steve Witkoff, and President Trump all confirm on the interview that Russia agreed to all the things that you pointed out, but then Russia is saying, oh no, we never agreed to that. Do you think this is actually miscommunication or translation mistakes happening between two countries? Or do you think Russia is saying one thing privately and just saying completely another thing publicly?
The Russians always speak this way. They operate in a gray area to obfuscate and confuse people, but this is how authoritarian regimes operate. They are not transparent. They deliberately lie. They deliberately mislead you. And normally, Russia is negotiating or having talks with a democratic country that tries to be direct, tries to be truthful, tries to understand and read between the lines to make progress. But we don't have that in America anymore. The Trump administration also likes to lie, likes to operate in the gray zone, likes to obfuscate and confuse people. So you have two parties trying to communicate to each other in which they both lie, they both mislead, they both misinterpret, and they're both trying to game the other side. And the Russians are just better at it. Lavrov's been doing this for 26 years. Peskov's been doing this for over 20 years. Putin's been doing this his entire life. So I think Witkoff is an idiot and he's outclassed, and he could be a brilliant real estate developer. That's what he's been doing his entire life. But he knows nothing about the Russians. He knows nothing about the history, the geography, the culture, the people. And he's the guy who's basically co-president on our foreign policy. It's not Marco Rubio leading all these talks. It's Witkoff going for these one-on-ones behind closed doors. And he's an idiot. And we're playing the telephone game going back to Trump. And Trump likes to do this. He likes to misinterpret or hear what he wants to hear. He then will announce it. And the awkwardness is on you if you don't deliver. There could be a genuinely beneficial strategy why Donald Trump does this, because if you just announce something that you didn't promise and it's now public, you might feel obligated to then fulfill that promise that Trump misinterpreted. But the Russians aren't going to do that. You can't trick the Russians into giving up their empire. This is what they want. They want the land. They don't care about the people. They don't care about international law. They want their empire back. And they're going to continue killing people until they think they've gotten everything they deserve.
And also, the other part is, and a lot of people pointed this out, maybe Putin was trying to set a trap for Zelensky. You know how he asked for Donbass, and then he's like, we'll freeze the lines everywhere else and we can meet with Zelensky. And then President Zelensky came to the White House on Monday, and we said on the channel where he kind of flipped the table, right? He's like, I'll meet with Putin and we can talk about territory directly, which we knew Putin would not agree to, because all this time he's been telling the Russian people and the international media that Zelensky is not a legitimate leader. So now Putin does not want to be standing next to him, negotiating and giving him legitimacy, and that would make him look weak in front of the Russian people. Would you say that? Like something like that was also in play?
Zelensky's a smart guy, and I think he's been given really good advice by European leaders how to talk to and how to manage Trump. And I think this is what happened on Monday at this Washington meeting. Zelensky showed up. Trump was all excited to see him, saying, hey, I got you security guarantees from the Russians. I got you a face-to-face. All you have to do is give up this little bit of territory in Donetsk. And Zelensky said, fine, I'll talk to Trump. I'll talk to Putin, and we'll discuss land. But Zelensky knew that Putin was never going to meet Zelensky face-to-face. So Zelensky was able to give a response to Trump that wasn't a no, but he knew it wasn't going to happen. Additionally, the Europeans are telling Trump, we're not going to do this. We're not going to force Ukraine to give up Donetsk. This is 10 years worth of fortified construction lines. There's about 10 large cities of greater than 10,000 people in Donetsk remaining, and they're all fortresses. If Russia wants to take this territory by force, it's going to take them another 3 years and another 1 million casualties. Whereas if Ukraine, this isn't going to happen, but if Ukraine surrendered all of these fortification structures, what's behind them is not a lot. It's open fields, it's more farmland. The Russians could then, if they get past this beltway of cities, they would have a real breakthrough. Threaten Kharkiv from the south, Dnipro from the east, Zaporizhia from the north. So no, this is a non-starter. I mean, Trump's too dumb to understand the maps. But Zelensky, I think, has mastered, just show up at the White House, wear black suits, tell Trump you love his hat collection and you think all the gold in the office is amazing, and then Trump's happy. It's that simple.
But the meeting did go well. Would you say that from the Ukrainian side, from the European side, the meeting with Putin? Because I know on the channel you were, I guess, arguing nothing was achieved, which is like looking back, I would say, since the whole meeting was built on the fact that Russia agreed to the security guarantees, and we were trying to figure out what to offer Ukraine. Now Russia is saying they didn't agree to anything. So maybe in that sense, it's like no point in the meeting now.
I thank European leaders for showing up. If it had been just Zelensky there on Monday, perhaps J.D. Vance and Trump might have tried to gang up on him again and say, you're being selfish. You're the one causing all these people to die. If you just give up this territory, then we can have peace in our time. But the Europeans knew that Trump was retweeting people over the weekend saying Ukraine has to give up territory to make the killing stop. So the European leaders showed up to show their support. And I think Trump, he's insecure when he's around attractive, younger, intelligent, democratically elected leaders, such as maybe Macron or now Merz, or we've got Stubb in Finland and Starmer. So yes, I think Trump felt the weight because this is how he thinks. These are popular people in their home countries. These are accomplished people, skilled diplomats. You even had Meloni of Italy. You've got 8 of them sitting around the White House. It made Trump feel important and special that all of them were thanking him and flattering him for everything he's accomplished, when he's accomplished nothing. But this is the game we're playing. The only benefit that Trump and the United States is providing anyone is we're selling weapons to the Europeans for profit. And the Treasury Secretary just publicly announced that we're marking everything up 10% to make even more money on the weapons we're selling to Europe so Ukraine can defend itself. Not a great position. As a service veteran, this is embarrassing. Not only are we not helping, we're price gouging people who are just trying to defend themselves from Russian aggression. Not a great feeling, but
yeah, I saw that clip too. Yeah,
this is where we are, and we just have to make the best of a terrible situation with Trump being in the White House the next 3.5 years. European leaders are getting it. They got an A for managing Trump that day. No blowups, no problems, but it's a low bar. It's an extremely low bar that we are trying to clear.
And yeah, I saw that clip too. I would have to look into that 10% extra, which I doubt saying it so publicly, Europeans are just going to be like, oh, we'll buy it, right? But let's see.
If you have no other alternatives for buying 155 millimeter artillery shells, you are going to buy those 155 millimeter artillery shells at a 10% markup. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, they're already getting their contract guaranteed price margins because they're still for-profit companies, publicly traded. They have a obligation to their shareholders. But Trump, I think, just said, charge them an extra 10% and that'll go into the U.S. Treasury. Because that's just how he treats everyone. That's how he's treating every country in the world. He's just trying to exploit people around the world to profit for himself, and who knows where this money goes. I have no idea how any of this works anymore. Because Congress is the one who's supposed to control the purse, but apparently Donald Trump now controls all monetary policy in the United States, not Congress or the Federal Reserve.
But the other side of this is also, would you see that as a positive sign? He did get European countries, NATO, to agree to a 5% defense spending, 3.5% directly to defense, and then other stuff to infrastructure. That's a huge news, especially for the safety of Europe itself, correct?
Yeah, but Europe's doing that out of panic, in that Donald Trump does not respect international law, and he might not adhere to Article 5 NATO protections. Like, people in Europe are panicking because the United States is threatening to invade Greenland and Panama and Canada. Like, international law, the rules-based order has broken down. Donald Trump doesn't understand it. He doesn't care about it, and he's not going to respect it. So you can go ahead and criticize Europe for not spending enough, not meeting the 2% NATO guidelines. But at the same time, it was the United States writing the security policy for Europe. If Europeans didn't have a say in the security of their own continent because the United States controlled it, then yeah, I understand why they would be lackadaisical about maintaining their ground forces. But now that the United States has proven itself a threat to Canada, a threat to Greenland and Panama, a threat to other parts of the world, Yes, Europeans, you have to defend yourselves from the Russians today, but potentially from the Americans tomorrow. That's a frightening world that I'm not going to celebrate and say, oh, thank God Trump, you know, broke so many promises that Europe felt like it needed to rearm itself to World War II levels.
No, for sure. I guess other argument I see is like more so Europe was not spending 2% because they were too dependent on the US military spending. So they were like, we have Article 5 and US has the military, or at least, like everyone believed we have the military to enforce peace all around the world. So US was just lackluster on the commitments they've made. So that's why that question. But
I'll just make the counter argument why we want a weak Europe, why we don't want European militaries building up. And that's because Europe kept destroying itself. Whether it's World War I or World War II, but it was every 30 years on the European continent, going way before even Napoleonic times. When European powers build up large militaries, I don't know if it's the proximity, I don't know if it's the geography, I don't know what, but Europe just keeps destroying itself. So I think in the post-World War II period, especially the post-Cold War period, U.S. presidents and U.S. Security experts were saying Europe doesn't have strong, powerful militaries. That's a good thing, because then we're not at risk of them killing each other again.
No, that's definitely interesting argument. I haven't heard that. I guess no, that makes sense. But it's also that's why they have EU, right? So they don't invade each other.
In theory, nations that trade together don't go to war together. That's Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. But at the same time, everyone was trading with Russia, and Russia still decided to declare war on their best customers.
Yeah, that's I know we have a Professor Miasarmer who's a little bit very pro-Russian, so I'm excited for that debate. Let's see how that goes, because he was dead wrong when he said Russia's not going to invade, and I think this was on February 20th, and then 4 days later Russia invades.
No, he's a Russian propagandist. I mean, all that Russian propaganda that was being pumped out when Biden was president, it's failing today. There are so many arguments about how the CIA is forcing Ukraine to fight, and Zelensky is a CIA puppet and all this, and we were responsible for the 2014 Maidan coup or whatever. All of these pro-Russian conspiracy theorists, these are American citizens who believe this nonsense. Okay, Trump is president, release the documents. If the CIA, instigated the coup and we expelled the democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, and Zelensky is our puppet, then produce some evidence, release some documents. We've got Kash Patel and, all of these crazy MAGA, pro-Russian, sympathetic, right-wing people. Reveal the conspiracy. This is a strong criticism I have for the entire MAGA movement and the current Trump administration. All of the crazy stuff you said was happening due to the deep state. Who's been arrested? Who's been prosecuted? What evidence has been presented? All of these conspiracies have died the last 8 months since Trump became president because none of them were true. If any of them were true, produce the evidence. Now that Trump has the kingdom, the keys to Washington, D.C., and could unlock any of this information. But MAGA thrived in the darkness, in conspiracy. You can just say whatever you want, make stuff up. And now that they're actually in charge of Congress, the courts, and the executive branch, I've not seen anything. Who killed JFK? Who really was behind the 9/11 attacks? Where is the proof of aliens at Area 51? Like all of these MAGA conspiracies that Joe Rogan pushed to get people to bring down Joe Biden in the deep state. Was any of it real? If it was, why isn't Trump telling the American people the truth? When you say that to a MAGA person, they're stunned. They have no answer, no explanation.
No, I think people are questioning more, especially with the Epstein stuff, even the Republican side. I think they're more questioning about where's all this stuff. But the other side is also with the pro-Russia stuff. Republicans, I'm sure you have seen it too, right? The new CNN poll, or not CNN, I think it was on the CNN clip. That's why I say CNN poll, which I've seen it on Fox channels too, where 76% of Republicans support Ukraine, don't like Putin. So which doesn't make sense why we have such a Like, you've probably seen it a lot more than me, right? Where in the,
So
not influencer world, the news world, where it's like a lot of people talk about pro-Russia stuff like it's the popular thing to do or something.
Well, so this was the tweet I saw from Representative Don Bacon showing. There's two kinds of Republican. Well, there's three kinds of Republicans. There are, Republicans who are traditional, strong national security. They understand Ukraine's our democratic ally. We should be helping them. But there's then people who are sympathetic to Ukraine and critical of the Russians, but they're just isolationists. They just say, it's a terrible tragedy over there, but we shouldn't be getting involved. And then there's the crazy people who are pro-Russian because they think Russia ideologically is their analogy on the European continent, and they want to promote it. And these numbers fluctuate greatly. Going back to February of 2022, 88% of MAGA Republicans supported sending military aid to Ukraine. It then, by the time of the November 2024 election, was down to 30% because they kept being bombarded with Kremlin propaganda from Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk and RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump Jr., saying that Ukraine is a corrupt country and all the money's being stolen, and Zelensky has been buying super yachts and he's a dictator and there are biolabs and Nazis and NATO expansion, blah, blah, blah. But the number has been going up since November, since Trump took office, and the propaganda has stopped because you can't promote conspiracies when your guy is in charge of everything. So now it's back up to 51. 51% of Republicans support sending military aid. This is not selling weapons. This is aid. This would be allocated by Congress. And yeah, you're right. In general, the overall number for Americans, it's now like 76, 77% of Americans support sending military aid to Ukraine because it's been 8 months. The war is not going to stop. And we're going to have another war and another war unless we stop the Russians today.
And I don't know if you saw this clip I saw, which I don't remember if this was in February 2022 or March 2022, where President Trump, or I guess not president back then, he called in to Fox and he said basically, we got to give Ukraine whatever they want. We got to send nuclear subs to the Black Sea and make sure Russians know that if they use nukes, we have nukes too. Have you seen that clip?
What, this was 2022?
Yeah, I think it was like week or month after the invasion started, and it was like a pretty pro Ukraine clip as much as it could get. And of course, go ahead.
Trump politicized Ukraine. He saw an opportunity. He wanted as many things in the world to be going bad and going wrong for Joe Biden to weaken Joe Biden as much as possible. It's a game that both parties play when they're not in power, but in general, with foreign policy, you don't do this. This is a famous quote from Republican Senator Vandenberg from the 1950s, in that partisanship ends at America's shores. Meaning, when it comes to dealing with the rest of the world, you don't second-guess the president. You don't weaken him, because people are fighting wars and people are dying. But Donald Trump doesn't play by any rules. Donald Trump will politicize anything. So he deliberately politicized Ukraine to not have the war end. Or if America had just given overwhelming support and force to Ukraine in 2022, the Russians would have been defeated by now. But Donald Trump wanted to weaken America's resolve to helping Europe so that it was a disaster by the 2024 elections. Trump could then use that as an issue to help himself get elected. And then he thought, Trump actually did think this. As soon as he got into office, Putin would do him a personal favor and just end these wars and make him look good. Help him get that Nobel Peace Prize. Trump doesn't care if Putin starts the war again once Trump's dead or out of office, but he genuinely thought Putin would do him a personal favor and stop killing people and make him look good. And Putin's not doing that.
So far, yeah. Luckily, Trump could still give Ukraine whatever they need to beat Russia. Hopefully he does it. But this is where I guess I'm sure you're talking about the famous quote where Trump said he can stop the war in 24 hours. Relating to that quote, would you consider this presidency a failure if he cannot stop the war?
Trump will play every side, both sides, till the end of time. Till the day he dies, he is going to take both positions to hedge his bets so that he can look like a genius or a winner if one way or the other happens. Reality doesn't matter. Trump just invents his own reality. He just says whatever he thinks should be reality, and his cult followers, his supporters, just take it. So this is incredibly frustrating because I know what's going to happen over the next year. Trump is going to do as little as possible to deter the Russians and help the Ukrainians. And if at some point there's an economic collapse of Russia and Ukraine is able to get their territory back, Trump is going to declare victory for himself and say that he was a genius and he always knew this was going to happen and he was the sole driving factor why Ukraine won this war and he should get a Nobel Peace Prize. He's just going to lie and say whatever he wants to make himself look as good as possible. That's what he does on every issue. Like, I'm not pretending here, Sam. I'm not playing around. I don't understand how I'm the only one explaining it exactly how it is, that he is a professional BSer and he has no morals and he's just in it for himself and how he can shape the debate or reality to make himself look as good as possible and his enemies as bad as possible. So your original question, will he do more? Maybe a little bit. Maybe he even might enforce sanctions on the Russians, but he generally wants to play both sides in that if somehow Russia has a breakthrough and overwhelms Ukraine and takes the capital city of Kyiv, he'll then declare he always knew Russia was the stronger force and Russia was always going to win, and so many people needlessly died because Joe Biden dragged it out and failed to get a diplomatic solution, and it's terrible, but the United States should move on and start doing business relations with the Russians.
And again, to be fair, actually, the sanctions on the shadow fleet are a lot tougher under Trump than Biden, because just some chart came out, Russian shadow fleets have been going down tremendously. So that's actually a positive news. Hopefully we get more.
No, those were the sanctions that were put on in December and January by Joe Biden.
I agree. Enforcement, I mean. Sanctions, probably old sanctions.
Yeah, I think enforcement is breaking down. I mean, it depends. The UK and the European Union have been placing new sanctions on Russia and their shadow fleet, but Trump has refused. Nothing new has been added since Trump got into office, and Trump fired all the people in charge of enforcing sanctions against Russia. So it really is voluntary at this point. These shipping companies, if they want to take the risk of being blacklisted, they can do that with the U.S. Treasury, but I don't think there's very much sanction enforcement going on at the moment at the U.S. Treasury.
Okay. Yeah, I was just referring to this data that just came out. I think Sky News was reporting where the shadow fleets taking off from Russian fleets have gone down in like the last few months. Not necessarily when the office switched, but just in the last few months. And let's shift to focus a little bit to the one side that mainstream media doesn't cover a lot more, because of course everyone talks about it, and we should be talking about the Russian attacks inside Ukraine, attacking the Ukrainian civilians, and Russia gaining ground on the front line, which of course we could argue that it's not worth it, right? Russia is losing so many people to gain a little bit of ground. But one thing that I don't see either side of the aisle here on the mainstream cable network talk about is the Ukrainian attacks inside Russia, where they're going after oil depots, they're going after train stations, railway lines, anything that's supporting the frontline efforts that Russia is carrying out. And on top of that, we have seen, I'm sure you're following it a lot closer than me, we have seen attacks inside Moscow, which is definitely scary. Maybe you can explain to the audience what kind of role this plays in stopping the war.
Ukraine is never going to have the manpower and resources to overwhelm the Russians in the occupied territories and take back all their territory by force. Perhaps prior to the summer 2023 Ukrainian counteroffensive, there was a belief, when Ukraine liberated large sections of Kharkiv, when they liberated the city of Kherson in the north bank of the Dnieper River, there was this belief that perhaps they could punch through the Zaporizhia region, get to Berdyansk or get to Melitopol, and then liberate Crimea by winter of 2023 or early 2024. But that just isn't going to happen now. Russia has more men and they have more resources. So for Ukraine to win this war, there has to be an economic collapse of the entire Russian system. So you can slow the Russians down by destroying their rail lines, destroying fuel cars. But if you want to completely cripple the Russian economy, then you have to go after the basis of their entire state. It's a petro state. It's entirely dependent on oil and gas revenues, both domestic and exported. So by going after these refineries, this is expensive, delicate equipment that was built with the cooperation and expertise of Western technicians. These are Western companies that went into Russia in the 90s and 2000s to help them build all of this infrastructure. And it's being destroyed in real time. We don't know how severe it is, and it depends refinery to refinery. But since August 1st, I think Ukraine has struck 8 refineries, some of them multiple times, and they're all offline. The official estimate is 13.5% of Russia's oil refining capacity has been eliminated in just this month. So these videos showing up online of gas shortages in the Far East, that's the perimeter of Putin's empire, the Far East, and they're running out of resources today. I can't imagine how horrible it is for the average person living in the occupied territories, but this is going to come back to Moscow eventually. If Ukraine can continue degrading their oil and gas industry, it just ripples across everything. Their agricultural sector, their industrial base, their shipping, their airlines, their banking sector. Everything in Russia at the moment is currently collapsing, and we're going to see some giants of Russia's industries and economy fall flat on their face this fall. They're going to be bankrupt, and the Kremlin has to bail them out. Stuff has to be restructured. People are losing their jobs. Working hours are reduced. Inflation is still double digits while pay is stagnant. Pensioners can't even afford to eat. Like, it's bleak in Russia. It can always get worse. They're not quite to a breaking point, but we're going to find Russia's breaking point, I think, over the next year, as Putin is never going to willingly stop these wars because he's now dependent on them.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Hopefully we can help Ukraine speed it up, the Russian collapse. But looking at the other side of the front line, and a lot of leaders are talking about this, is the security guarantees for long-term future of Ukraine. Now, people have talked about Article 5 type guarantee, whatever that means, type, since that word could mean a lot of things. In your opinion, what would be a strong guarantee so it doesn't become like the Budapest 2.0? Because many people could argue that was a security guarantee, and it didn't really work out how Ukraine was hoping.
There are no security guarantees for Ukraine. They don't exist. They're not real. If Russia has set their sights on destroying and conquering Ukraine and absorbing them back into their empire, we've already proven that nobody in the Western Alliance is willing to use their own military to help defend Ukraine. If no military today, not Sweden, not Germany, not the Netherlands, not the UK, not Canada, if nobody is willing to go to Ukraine today to fight the Russians in the trenches, then they're not going to be willing to do it in 3 or 5 years. If any country signs a piece of paper with Ukraine saying if Russia attacks you again in the future, our military will show up to defend you, they're lying. It would be a bluff. It would be a deterrent that Russia would not respect or take serious. On Kremlin State TV, they threaten to nuke Berlin and London and Paris every single day. They say that any country helping Ukraine in any capacity is a valid military target, that they will use nukes in a first strike. Putin doesn't say that because Putin knows how to play the game, but he has his attack dog Medvedev, or he has Kremlin State TV, which nothing is said on Kremlin State TV without the approval of Putin. They do these threats and they work. And right now, I imagine people in Europe, people in Japan, South Korea, Australia, they're feeling pretty insecure because the United States is supposed to be providing a nuclear umbrella of 5,500 nukes to all of our democratic allies. And Trump doesn't believe in respecting existing defense treaties with other nations. So if nobody is willing to go to Ukraine today, then they're not going to be willing to go in 3 or 5 years because all of the conditions will be the same. Russia is going to be threatening to nuke Berlin, threatening to nuke London, Amsterdam, if anybody helps the Ukrainians defend themselves. So the only security guarantee for Ukraine is a strong Ukraine. More air defense systems, more cruise missiles, more ballistic missiles, more brigades, a larger military. That's the only thing that will save Ukraine. So if we can get some kind of political instability in the Russian system, an economic or a political collapse, when that window opens for Ukraine, they have to develop nuclear weapons as fast as possible. And then they'll have their own nuclear deterrent, their own security guarantee. Given what happened with the Budapest Memorandum, going back in time, Ukraine was the third largest holder of nuclear weapons after the collapse of the Soviet Union. If any country in the world deserves the right to nuclear security and guarantees for themselves, it is Ukraine. And I think that's their destiny. They're not going to do it while they're actively fighting the Russians, because if there's the intelligence reports, Russia can say they have the justification for a first strike against Kyiv or Kharkiv or Odessa. But if the Russians blink or pause at some point in the next decade, Ukraine has to get their own nukes as fast as possible. It's the only security guarantee for their future.
Which I guess that makes sense. I understand where you're coming from, but wouldn't that make world a more dangerous place? Because more countries could use the same argument, saying we could get invaded, so we want...
What other country has the exact, they had nukes in the past, they agreed to give them up for security guarantees, and then the country who signed the paper with them invaded them anyways. Like, if any other country is in that identical situation, I will support them getting nukes as well.
Yeah.
But there's no other country, except Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is the only other country that could potentially happen.
No, for sure. I understand the point, but I don't know if that would actually happen, because a lot of work has gone into the non-nuclear, treaties, non-nuclear proliferation treaty. And I think only country that broke it is North Korea.
So the reason why Ukraine wants to get into NATO so bad is if France and the UK and the United States' nuclear umbrella protects all of NATO, then it would protect Ukraine, and Ukraine wouldn't need to join NATO. But I don't think Ukraine is ever going to join NATO. I just think getting every NATO country to vote for it, because that is a requirement of the alliance.
Really tough.
All Russia has to do is buy off one. All Russia has to do is bribe one country in our alliance, and our alliance becomes dysfunctional and ineffective. That seems like a design flaw in the alliance, that Russian money can corrupt a single member, and then the entire alliance doesn't function anymore.
Yeah.
This is a problem. Ukraine, I think, itself would say, well, how can we even trust NATO after everything that has been exposed with NATO's weaknesses the last 3.5 years? Ukraine needs to just protect themselves. If they join the European Union and they get economic integration, they will be prosperous, but militarily, they should just do their own thing, because I don't know how Ukrainians could ever rely on Europe going forward if Russia remains a threat to their security.
Yeah, it makes sense. Have you seen, I'm forgetting the name, the Norwegian professor, or maybe not Norwegian, Andres Nielsen?
Anders Puck Nielsen?
Yep, you're right. He made it.
So he's Danish.
Oh, Danish. My mistake completely, yeah. He made an interesting argument in his most recent video which again, I don't know the details, he knows a lot more than me, where EU has a stronger military guarantees than NATO. I think his argument was like, people are overblowing how strong Article 5 is. Because similar to with the point you brought up, where everyone needs to agree to let a new member in, I think the Article 5 basically says we'll have an appropriate response if you're attacked, which means they could just protest.
Well, Article 5, it's still voluntary for each member.
Yeah.
So no country is ever compelled to help protect another member of the alliance. It still goes down to being bilateral. But the way that the United States military has integrated itself with NATO and the NATO command, basically the United States military takes over other countries' militaries, and they become subordinate to the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO during a conflict. And this is how the United States designed it, and this is going back to why Europeans were less than enthusiastic in building up their own militaries. Because if NATO goes to war, in theory, yes, the French military, the German military, the British military becomes subordinate to the US chain of command, because you have to have one guy at the top to fight a war. But it's still voluntary. Basically, the Finnish military would say, okay, Article 5's been triggered. We're now in the group, and the United States is telling us where to go and what to do. They're the one coordinating air assets, naval assets, and ground forces. You can't have 32 different commanding supreme commanders doing their own thing. One person has to be in charge of the whole effort. But it's still voluntary, even under Article 5.
For sure, yeah. Do you think Russia would let Ukraine join EU? Of course, I know the argument where it's not Russia's say, right?
Correct.
We know that, but do you think they would have, which
No.
publicly they have said,
no, they don't want Ukraine developing positively in any respect. Do you want to just talk about what this war is really about? Like, going back to the root cause, this is the honest answer. Putin could not allow Ukraine to become a free and democratic state with real economic prosperity, because that would threaten Putin's power at home. If Russian speakers on the Russian side of the border had a lower standard of living and a worse quality of life than the Russian speakers on the Ukrainian side of the border, then they would say, why do they have a higher standard of living? Why do they have better government benefits? Why do they have clean drinking water and indoor plumbing and we don't? And that would lead to a revolt or a revolution inside Russia. So Putin launched this war, and this is one of the primary reasons, to make sure that life in Ukraine does not become better for anyone in life in Russia, because that would threaten his own power. Because Putin has no interest in developing the quality of life for the average Russian citizen in the Horde lands. So you asking, would Russia ever be okay with Ukraine joining the EU? If that would lead to economic prosperity, then no. Putin is opposed to it. When you look at the meteoric rise in the standard of living for places like Poland, Finland, and the Baltics, Ukraine would have a similar boom. Ukraine's GDP and economy would blossom if they had free and fair elections, real free markets that weren't corrupt and, money's being stolen everywhere. If education and healthcare and social benefits increase to make the quality of life better for the average Ukrainian. These are things that Russia cannot abide. They will not allow this to happen because that threatens Putin's power at home, because he's never going to improve the lives of the average Russian.
Since we bring up Poland, actually, do you know how Poland joined NATO? It's a very interesting story where the Polish prime minister or president, I'm messing that up, during 90s, he would keep visiting the US, especially like the Polish heavy towns.
Yeah, I think I did see a clip of this. In the 90s, Poland knew, while Russia is weak, we got to get into NATO as fast as possible. And yeah, this was something to do with Bill Clinton. And
during the election, he would keep visiting the town.
You're right.
And
the Polish president, you're right. The Polish president kept going to states that had a large Polish immigrant population to get them to put pressure on Bill Clinton to pressure NATO to allow Poland in, and that's how Poland got. You're right. That was
and the same interpretation. And they were also like, oh, if you don't get NATO, we have to get nukes. It's either or. So either we leave the NPT or we get into NATO. Ukraine could do something similar, because I noticed in Germany now, the biggest immigrant population in almost every states. I don't know if they call it states, but you get what I mean. It's Ukrainian now. In every state, it's Ukrainian. So slowly, domestic policy leads foreign policy. So slowly, it's like those people will vote for Ukraine, help Ukraine, and then Germany foreign policy will shift more towards Ukraine compared to what it is now.
People have to get creative. Politically, whatever you can do to stop Russia or prevent the next war, yeah, do it.
And I guess let's come back to here now in the United States. I'm sure you've noticed this, where back in the day, historically, far left was very in love with the Soviet Union, and now it seems the far right loves Russia for whatever reason. They have their own reasons. It's because maybe they think Russia is a place for Western values, which is not, but they believe it. And as we already brought up, Tucker Carlson has been one of the bigger proponents of pushing this fake information, I would say. Fake news. Why do you think that is? Why are they so pro-Russia? Even though, the arguments they make, they're not true.
So of the Americans who have moved to Russia and joined the Russian military to fight for Russia, they're either Nazis, communists, or pedophiles. Those are the only people in America willing to go to Russia to fight for Russia. And I don't know if people who support Russia actually believe the propaganda, but they are in love with the idea of Russia. So this guy who is the son of a CIA agent, he described himself as a communist, whereas some of these other people who have gone over there, they've got Nazi tattoos. So how do you have communists and Nazis fighting for Russia? And it's because Russian propaganda puts out conflicting messages. They love this. The Russians will put out ambiguous, conspiracy, deep state stuff, and you see what you want. You interpret it how you want to interpret it. For people who are mentally ill or delusional, you latch on to what you want to believe, and then you think Putin's your guy. Now, you're asking, why do people like Tucker Carlson support Russia? Well, Tucker Carlson has been fired by every news network. He's been fired by CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, PBS, and he doesn't really have a future in American broadcast. So he's doing his own thing on YouTube, and it's just profitable to be a contrarian. So the new term that people use is the Global South, and if you're familiar with Jackson Hinkle, I think, is like the poster child for appealing to the Global South and the outrage of the old exploited colonial, territories. It's those evil elitists in, France and the UK and the United States who have been imposing their will and agenda on the rest of the world. Russia's the good guy because Russia's standing up to the old colonial powers. Now, this is insanely hypocritical for people in the Middle East or Southeast Asia or Africa to be championing Russia when Russia was always an imperial power that subjugated their neighbors. Russia never made it to Southeast Asia or the Middle East or Africa because they sucked at building ships. But if 500 years ago, Peter the Great was good at building ships, then yes, they would have subjugated and colonized the Middle East and Africa instead of the British or the French. So people who champion and support Russia, they just view them as a weapon. They're using them. Nobody in the Middle East or Africa or Southeast Asia or even Tucker Carlson loses any sleep or cries their eyes out about a dead Russian soldier. Russia is just a tool. It's a weapon that they're exploiting because they have grievances against the LGBT community or, undocumented immigrants or whatever. Like, they just think Russia is beneficial to their pet projects and personal causes. And it's just... It's easier to be a contrarian. When you promote conspiracies, you don't have to provide evidence, and you get more views, you get more engagement. It's hard defending the status quo. It's hard showing up and saying we should have competent, intelligent, responsible people managing our federal systems rather than a charismatic cult leader who's going to fight for us tooth and nail. Donald Trump puts on this narrative and an image where people can project onto them anything they want. And it's weird talking to the average Trump supporter because, I genuinely want to know what is their thing. What is, the one thing that they think Donald Trump is going to accomplish for them when he's not? He didn't accomplish anything in his first term. He's not going to accomplish anything this term. He's eventually going to die and fall flat on his face, and history will forget him because he will have done nothing that will be lasting for American democracy.
I think a lot of people also are single issue voters, so that plays a huge role in they just see one issue that Trump's doing. They are not as researching as well as most people. Yeah, go ahead.
For simple-minded people, yes, holding on to one issue in their brain is a challenge for them, and they just focus on that, whether it's immigration or I think the food people are the weirdest. People who thought that RFK Jr., as soon as he got into office, was going to make all of our food healthy again, and we would stop having so many fat people in America. Those people, when I talk to them who support Trump, the Maha movements, they're the funniest because RFK Jr. has done nothing. Getting rid of funding for mRNA vaccines or trying to get rid of food coloring, that's not what's making people sick. It's not what's making people fat. It's added sugar being in almost everything we eat, which is making people overweight and unhealthy. But RFK Jr.'s brilliant strategy is to have real sugar cane put back in Coca-Cola as opposed to high fructose corn syrup, when there's no difference.
Yeah.
There's no difference between sugar cane that comes from the tropics and high fructose corn syrup grown in Iowa. Nobody is getting healthier under RFK Jr. or Donald Trump.
Yeah, I guess that's the issue where like the goal is probably good, intention is good. I would say like they want to make the food healthy, but the way they're doing it, I probably wouldn't agree, right? Because like you could argue, especially if you compare it to Europe and Canada, what is the food?
He is killing people. He is killing people. Promoting raw milk consumption. Like he's like pasteurizing milk is bad. So like a dozen people in the last 8 months have died drinking raw milk because like idiots like RFK Jr. are promoting it as a healthy option or whatever. Like there's a million little things where they just make stuff up. They ignore scientists, they ignore medical professionals, they're pushing insane things, and people are dying. Children are being deformed and dying from measles because people are no longer getting, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. Like this is insane.
See, that's the crazy part. This is where like people vote on the single issue. I did not know about the raw milk thing, and I thought I was keeping up with news, but
it's everything in the United States is going to get worse over the next 3.5 years. Democrats, liberals, whoever, you go ahead and criticize them. You can make fun of them. It's fine. But they did warn us. They said exactly what would happen. These clips from the debates between Kamala Harris and Trump saying if Trump gets into office, Putin will have him wrapped around his finger. Trump is so easy to manipulate. Trump can't stand up to Putin. You can play the clips. Doesn't matter.
No, for sure.
We're in the find out part, so we're all gonna find out where this is going.
Since we're talking about, so do you think it's problematic that we're sanctioning only India for buying Russian oil? And how does that affect the U.S.-India relationship? So on the channel we talked about it. It's definitely a good sign that Trump was doing something, but
not a sanction.
It stopped at India.
Not a sanction. It's a tariff. And it's 25% on top of the additional 25%, so 50% tariffs or whatever. But this has nothing to do with Ukraine. Trump is lying. Trump will say, I'm putting an additional 25% on India because they buy Russian oil. But as soon as India concedes some other economic point, we'll buy more American oil, or we'll buy something else from America, or we'll reduce our own tariffs. Then Trump will drop it. It had nothing to do with Ukraine. He's just using Ukraine as an excuse. But no, this is insane. These tariffs don't do anything. I don't remember what the import volume is from India, but it's pharmaceuticals and textiles and precious gems and tariffs. So Americans have to pay 50% more for their precious gem imports from India. India doesn't care. They'll just find other buyers.
No, for India, actually, the U.S. is the biggest market. So for India, it's definitely
for what?
Exports.
Really?
Yeah.
India exports more to the United States than they do to China?
Yeah, India, China don't export that much. China doesn't import that much in general. They export a lot. Export-based economy.
So do you think India is genuinely concerned about these 50% import tariffs?
Likely. They probably are, yeah. But that's the thing. Maybe for them, I don't know that much about India. I do try to keep up a little bit here and there. But the other part which is like valid criticism, which that's the argument Trump administration is using. For China, pre-war and post-war, like growth in the oil imports isn't huge. It's still like they're still the biggest importer, but they were still importing most from Russia even before the war. For India, it's drastic. It went from like 1% to 20% of their oil, and a lot of the oil, India is making this argument where they're doing it to help their citizens, but they're just refining it and selling it to Europe. So it's like the citizen argument makes sense for their citizens. Go ahead.
So I remember a report I saw 3 years ago that this is a good thing. We actually want India buying as much cheap Russian oil as possible and then refining it and then getting it out. So if we destroy Russia's domestic capacity to produce refined oil products, this will cause prices to go up for everyone in the world because we live in a global economy. But if Russia can't refine their own crude oil, they have to export more, which actually brings down the price of oil. And if India has spare refining capacity, we want them buying cheap Russian oil under the price cap and then refining it and selling it on the global market to make up for the loss that Russia is incurring. it's about keeping the prices down. I don't want to relitigate 2024 and Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan's disastrous policies, but that was part of it. We don't want the global economy crashing due to high energy prices because Russia is integrated with everyone. We need Russia's raw commodities and energy exports for the entire world to maintain its current standard of living. Russia is just too large and important to completely close them off because this would shock the entire planet. Now, one strength of Trump, I'll just give it, is Trump doesn't listen to anybody or care about the numbers or think through any of his decisions. So if we do get a shocking reversal and Trump starts aggressively going after isolating Russia, this will cause Russia to collapse sooner. But yes, the global economy, global energy markets, global supply chains are going to be severely disrupted. Like the stock market is going to go down if Russia collapses because the entire world is dependent on, their food and agricultural exports and the raw commodities and their energy, which if Russia goes dark, if the Kremlin loses control of everything, the world is going to get very... it's going to get bad.
Hard times. Yeah,
it's going to be bad for everybody.
No, for sure. I know we're getting late on time, but this is another interesting argument I recently heard was like, we may not punish Russia for being the aggressor because it is a strong nation and all the points you brought out, as long as like we can bring long-term peace along the front lines. And we have seen some examples of this, right? South Korea war, where the front was frozen on the front line, and then of course the Civil War, where we didn't punish the aggressor, a U.S. Civil War, where we didn't punish the aggressor because we wanted long-term peace. So you have to integrate them back into the world society. What are your thoughts on like that argument? I guess you could say Germany maybe after World War II. Or
if there was a frozen conflict, I think sanctions and frozen relations or whatever would probably stay in place until Putin dies. Putin's 71, 72. At some point, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, maybe, I don't know. He's going to die eventually. And that's what the West will use as a reset opportunity for whoever replaced Putin. Can we talk to you? Can we do business with you? Like, will you just stop killing people? And then America and NATO and the European Union has no problem doing business with a dictator. They have no problem doing business with somebody who tortures and kills and persecutes their own people. You can kill your own people, that's fine. But the rule since 1945, the international rules-based order, is you can't invade your neighbor, your smaller neighbor, and then kill them. And Putin broke that rule. And she wants to break that rule. So yes, I think Putin needs to be a pariah and isolated, and that's going to hurt Russia's standing in relation with anybody in the world. But when Putin's dead, we're going to give the next guy a shot.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for giving us your time. It was definitely very, very interesting. You're learning all the point of view. I'm hoping audience learned a lot too. And we'll link your YouTube channel. Anything else you want us to link down below? Twitter?
No, I'm good. Thank you.